You are listening to the INCJ podcast, Conversations about International Criminal Justice. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our International Network Criminal Justice podcast. And it's called From Holland to Nigeria, Creating Informal Courts in an African Jail. It's a long title, but it's a good one. Now, this episode is co-produced with the Chinese podcast, Prison Desires, and we hope you enjoy the international cross-boundary nature of INCJ. We are now in our fourth episode in a series called Just Arts, so you can catch up on earlier topics if you want to via our website. We talk to leading arts practitioners and researchers about their work with people in prison and community settings around the world. Now, the material in this episode is so special, we've already arranged a follow-up with Nigerian colleagues to reflect on learning from the project. So do keep an eye out for the next episode, which will be called Reflections on Informal Courts. And this is going to be out soon. ... Please listen to that one as well. Now, my name is John Scott, and today I am sharing the hosting with a colleague from De Montfort University here in the UK. So, how about you introduce yourself, Xiaoye?
Hello, everyone again. It's Xiaoye here, hosting with Zhang. I am currently in Leicester, and originally I'm from Beijing, China. And I'm not lecturing at De Montfort University Criminology. So first of all, thank you very much for Joost and Millet to join us today from Amsterdam. Are you both in Amsterdam now, or is Millet in another city?
Yeah, I actually live in Belgium now.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I actually moved to another city. So
okay. So no
in
one's
spirit, we are in Amsterdam. It's our capital. Yeah.
Wow. So we are sitting in three different countries actually this morning. So could you say hello to everyone and tell us really briefly what you're working on at this moment? Joost, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting us and giving us the opportunity to tell us you a little bit more about our project. My name is Joost van Onna. I live and work in the Netherlands. I work at the Public Prosecution Service at the Netherlands as a researcher and an advisor. And besides that, I'm a research fellow at the VU University in Amsterdam, one of the two universities there, where I do more academic research. And the third strand is that I work together with Melle in our foundation called Aardschap Foundation, where we do a different kind of projects, including the Informal Justice Court we're talking to you about today.
Okay. Shall I go?
Yes, please.
Yeah, my name is Melle Smets. I'm an artist, mainly working in public space or for creating public spaces. And right now I'm working on the House of the Future. In the Netherlands, it's actually a tradition. I don't know about England, that you sort of, take a leap into the future by creating a House of the Future, has a sort of visualization of how the future could be. And this particular House of the Future I'm now building is actually a sort of experience room, how to live on human power only. So it's, you are the energy source for your household. And this house is actually built in an old social housing project in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Rotterdam. And here we invite CEOs or politicians or people who are actually very far from living a normal life. And then we put them in this house, and then they experience the strategies of people on the bottom of society, how they strategically survive in a city where you don't, and most of these people don't have access to money or to networks or to high-tech solutions. But there are a lot of interesting ways on a low-tech way how to survive and how to deal with modern life. And we sort of create an experience for these CEOs to learn what's going on in reality, and hopefully that will also serve as a sort of feedback loop for them to also take a second guess on all the decisions they make at the top.
Well, I don't know about you, Xiaoye, but it seems to me we could do a broadcast on both these two men's careers and what they're doing now. But we want to find out about a different story. And how did it all begin that you ended up working in a Nigerian prison? So, should we start by asking how two people like you, how did you meet? Who's going to start? Tell us the story. How did you meet Melle?
Well, that's a long time ago. Actually, I don't have memories of it. So I think we were 2 or 3 when we met for the first time. So yeah, it's a long time ago. And no, so we met in kindergarten, and a very experimental one, because in that time they were one of the first kindergartens created, and they were, I think, anarchistically organized. So you drop your children and then you let them go, and then on the end of the day you look what's left of them. So that's how we got to know each other. So we go way back.
So you met as really small children, and were you friends right from the beginning, and you just clicked, or you were just part of a large group, or how, what happened, Joost?
Well, we got to know each other as children. Obviously, we didn't have a lot of choice as we were only small, and our parents were friends and colleagues at the university, our fathers, and we grew into very good friends. Then Melle moved away to another part of the Netherlands. We saw each other a little bit less, and we reconnected when we were teenagers again. And I think what connected us, among other things, that we're both had a drive to explore the world. We wanted to understand it also. And I was already fascinated about the things Melle was doing. And he later joined the art school. He became an artist. And he did that in a particular way that was really interesting to me. So he was not painting a nice painting in his own place, but he would go out into the world and explore it and do that in a different, interesting way for me.
But you've got very different jobs. Did you have very different interests at school? Did you study different things at school?
I guess we did. I mean, I'm now more an academic researcher. And Melle is more, in my words, maybe an artistic researcher. So I think we had maybe a different interest at school, or maybe a different approach to how to do it. I may reflect more on things and think about it, smoke a pipe, and think, what is happening? More analytical, maybe. And Melle is, in my view, a very creative, hands-on guy who is really looking for community building, bringing people together, and explore it in a different way, and research it in a different way, and that matched very nicely. And so we grew from that, and later, but we come to that, we will work together more professionally.
Okay. I'm going to ask the same question of both of you. Let's start with you then, Joost. What shaped your choices about education and the career you wanted to follow?
So was this for me?
Yeah, Joost, you go first. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I studied. I went to university, and I think that was more or less a result of doing higher education, and and you think, well, then I have to go to the university. I studied psychology, and like I said, my father was in the university, so I think I have that background. But then I also had a different side to me. I think I didn't really want to do the traditional research. So, for example, when I graduated from university, I helped out a Peruvian man who had this brilliant idea to start a school for street children in Cusco, where tourists would go and they would want to learn Spanish. And in the school where the street children are taught English, so they could easily find a job in the tourist industry, and it would be one school, and they would help each other out, and the students would pay for the education for the street children, and so and that is and I engaged in that project by doing researching with the street children what they would like, how you could design a method that would be appealing to them without reading big books, because they live and work on the street. And for me that was an important project, because it's not just being a researcher or fly on the wall studying, but also wanting to bring about a change and document that, and also, I guess, trying to play my part in helping people like these children who were in need of help.
Oh, Mela, so let me ask the same question. So we've heard that you were artistic. So what shaped your choices about education and then the career you chose?
Yeah, well, for me, it was, I think, going to school, I associate more with a very frustrating time where I always had to do things I was not good at. So it was not, I don't have good memories of going to school because I could not read well. I had a hard time with focusing or just sitting on a chair. That was already a challenge. So I think for me, the artistic part came much later, that I sort of, almost fell out of the school system because it was so frustrating to be there. That on the end, I found out that there was a possibility. Hey, there's a possibility you can live a different life. And that was not in all the forms. We were at school in the 90s, and then that was all rational scripts of what can you become. And that was already a weird question to me, that, I was born as a human and now suddenly I have to become something else, or on top of that, I have to become something more than being a human. And then in the scripts, you could sort of, find your root in the script. And then all the professions that came out, I never really felt anything with it. I thought, this is not what I want to be. So once I found out that, you can have an artistic practice, then I thought, wow, but that's maybe a solution for me, because then I can get out of this system and be free. So I think that was for me the main motivation to get into the arts. I mean, I never felt being an artist, and I still don't really feel like an artist, but it was a way out. And it's true, it gave me the opportunity to have a very challenging and adventurous life, because everything you make up can be reality, and that's something that is well, I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to do this.
It's almost like education was a straitjacket, and you had to break out of that.
Yeah, well, yeah, but just to sort of realize that it is a script made up, that was already like, as a child, you just experience as a reality. And so it was a big liberation to find out, oh, well, wait a minute, that's just a script, you can do something else. So for me, that was an enormous opportunity as well, because there are art schools. I mean, if there were no art schools, I don't know how I did it, but this was a way to institutionalize, be free.
I love that phrase. Now, you seem to be very different people, but what do you have in common?
Well, Joost already said it. I think, the curiosity and, the urge to explore, I think those are two things we're always connected. We also liked always to travel and to, experience different perceptions of reality. And we were always very eager to do that or to experience it. And we also had a lot of talks about, let's say, the way we are trying to, sort of institutionalize life, and then, and living life. And then there's this friction which is always going on. And, especially Joost is, as a scientist, also so-called, sociologist. How you say it? Sorry. So, yeah, how do people live together and then study it from an artistic view and from a scientific view? That really connected us to, well, to also think about how can you sort of solve this? Probably we can't, because you need both sides, but this in between, and how can you sort of also design different ways to solve problems? That is something we always were eager to look at, or to make up ourselves, or to figure out how things work.
Yeah.
And Joost, your answer to that question about what you had in common?
Well, I think we both, like to get out of the straitjacket, to stay in those terms, but in different ways, And I think that there are many ways people can do that, but we found a way to work together, and we have a lot of fun doing it. So that was nice, and more like substantial, what we were interested in. Like Mette said, I think we were very interested in people in general, how they organize themselves, and especially outside the system. We'll maybe come back to that. The Informal Justice Court is called the Informal Justice Court, just like other informal systems exist, economic systems. People organize themselves outside the realm of the government, and of course they do that in the Netherlands or in the UK, or they do it everywhere. But it's more difficult to see. It's not that obvious, and in generally speaking, it's smaller. But we really like to study that, and like I said before, not by being a fly on the wall, and that was so inspiring for me that you can set something in motion and study it and get people together, and so it's also the way we work, and we try to work that is engaging for us. And then of course we do, I do my part, Mette does his part, and that's maybe more traditional in some way. I mean, Melle makes art, he's a fantastic drawer, he can do many other things, and I can think about things, or I can relate it to literature or some other criminological insight or psychological insight, and I think that works really well for us. And then there's also the area where we work very closely together, like to set up project like this, and other projects that we did, and try to mix methods also, and trying to say, for example, bringing people together. If I give one example that we did in Lagos, that's something I would not do. I learned from Melle, but for example, we organized expositions where we made art with things you can look at, but it was also like a method to bring people in, people from different backgrounds. So maybe lawyers, people within the prison system, and organizing that exhibition, having them look at art or some other item, and then organizing and getting into the discussion. That's not a very academic way of working, but it's very effective, and it's also very fun. So it's inspiring to do things like that.
Mm. And just before we get into the project itself, a few more questions about general methodology of that you two work with. First, what's your understanding of research? Because I think both of you are slightly unconventional, either as an academic or as an artist, in terms of your venturing into the real world practice, intervention, or molding things. So how do you understand research, and how do you collaborate in terms of the research aspects of your project? Mile, maybe first.
Yeah, well, the term we were happy to use was action research. That's now back into the sort of common way of researching. But in the time we found this method was, I think, in the beginning of the 2000s. So and then it was sort of a bit. Yeah, it was something from the 70s, and it became a sort of dirty word, I guess, because of it's not very clear in terms of science, I guess, because you interfere with reality, and then it becomes messy, and so in that time that term was not used that much. But for us, it opened up this door where you can. Use artistic practice into research, because you can do an action, an artistic action, and that gives a lot of feedback, because people will jump on it because it's weird, or it's let's say it's strange. So it's easy to stand out and to have a feedback, and then you have an action research going. So for us, that gave the opportunity to sort of use to work from two disciplines into one project. And that worked out quite well, because it sort of, it fits the model we sort of created ourselves.
Yeah. And maybe to give an example of one of the projects we did before the Lagos project was we did in Ghana, in Kumasi. We, together with a lot of people in Ghana, we built a car, the first car built there with 50 mechanics and in a 3-month period. And the car, which was exported and exhibited in the Netherlands and other parts in Europe, and then went back, was something we were all very proud of, but it was also like a research vessel, in the sense that we wanted to understand how would an African car look like that was well adapted to the African conditions and not designed in Japan or in Europe, and how would that work out, and how could we understand by building a car the environment the car was built in. In Swami Magazine is a neighborhood with around 200,000 people who work on old cars that are shipped from Europe and the Americas to Ghana. And so by building the car, we could also document, all the professions that are working there, and track all the parts and document that and make a book about it, but also think with academics to make a plan how the building of cars, like an educational tool, could also evolve. And for us, that I think it's a good example how we work. And so the car in itself was great, but it was also a research method, and the same is true what we did in Nigeria.
Yeah, action research is quite popular in China, especially for rural studies, where people work with village residents to find out needs and solutions with them. I don't know if it's still popular now, but when a few years ago, I think there are quite a few people that are doing it. So, and I think my own research in Chinese prison, when you were talking about action research, I never thought of my research action research, but actually it kind of also is, because you are kind of mixing and interacting between your research, the understanding of how things work, the mechanism, while you're doing actions. You're not saying, we need to understand things from a distance without interfering first, and then we do something about it. But it happens simultaneously. And in informal areas like prison research in China doesn't have a official channel. You can't really apply to research. It is done somehow in an informal way as well. In informal context, I think things, research and practice happening simultaneously is a reality as well. That's how things naturally evolve. And one last question before I hand over to John. Is there any moments in your collaboration where you disagree and you pull in different directions because of your different backgrounds or training?
Of course, all the time. But, well, I think being friends helps to sort of find a common ground. I think we are very eager to do this. So we work hard for this. So I think that also makes it successful, because it's easy to get, to stand your ground from your own perspective and then stay there. But I think with us, we really try to find this, the common sense or where we can sort of meet. But I think there's always a big tension between, let's say, the rules of science have to be, you have to seek for the truth. And from an artistic perspective, you're looking maybe for truth, but, first of all, for a great story. So you're trying to search for how can we elaborate on what we see in front of us. And for me, it's a story in first step. So yeah, reality has to sort of support that. And sometimes I easily mix up time or names or, the order of things, because I think it's the story is important, and we use the reality to construct the story. And I think there we sometimes have conflict, because then Joost says, no. Now you're mixing up things and you are getting away from truth. And that's, I think, a tension, which will always be there.
Yes. I would agree, but from my point of view, if we work together, and I may say outside the academic world. I mean, we have our own way of doing action research. We're not too concerned about the long academic tradition in this part. But I'm just saying that if I would mold it into an academic frame, there would be more tensions, I guess, because it would be more difficult. But I'm really happy to be outside of that, because I also do more traditional scientific research at the university and stuff. And I mean, that is very interesting and great. And it all depends what you want to research. But if you want to do something like that, to get really in touch with inmates, for example, we'll move into that direction. And you can also give them something, like we tried to do. Of course, that changes the interaction, and maybe it also, you lose some of the objectivity, maybe because we also engaged. We have interest in it, but if you counterbalance that to the engagement you go from the inmates, open up, doing the project, trusting us, all these kinds of things that are also very important. If you talk about academic research, that's something you can do more freely, I feel, in a project like that.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about trust, and what we want to do is think about how you build trust, not just between two researchers, but also across two different cultures, because you went to Africa, to two different countries. We've mentioned Ghana, and we're going to be talking about in much more detail going into a prison in Nigeria, in Lagos. So we're really keen to find out about the origins of two collaborative projects. This vehicle, which sounds like a piece of art itself. So how did you come to choose to do something with a car, building a car? Okay, informal economy, I imagine. But why Africa, and why a car? It's just amazing.
Well, I think we were in Detroit traveling, and that was obviously the sort of fountain of mass-produced vehicles, and we were astonished by the fact that a huge city like this can be imploded. It just sort of disappeared from the map, and leaving just streets as ruins. And we were there for quite a while. We were just really it's amazing, but it's also, you can hardly imagine that this happens in a civilization. And that made us also think about, what does tell this? So this was a very formalized system, the Ford system of assembling cars. So it was very structured, and at the same time, the moment Ford was sort of collapsing, or the competition became bigger, then a whole society collapses with it. And that was like, wow, that's not robust. That's not a civilization at all, actually. That's just a factory. And so from there, we started to think about, can we find, let's say the opposite of this? So is there somewhere a car factory to be found where the society around it is strong? And that's how we sort of found Swami magazine as a sort of counterpart, where there's a whole society as a sort of open air factory running on discarded cars from all over the world. So they sort of end up there, and then it goes in. Nobody really understands how it works, but it sort of makes from these car wrecks driving cars again, but then suitable for the African market. And for us, that was like a thing like, wow, if you could research this, then maybe we can also learn something from how can the informal meet the formal, and at the same time produce a highly sophisticated technical product as a car is. So that's, I guess the first step we took, like, okay, then we should, go there. And then once you go to Ghana and you step out of a car and then you walk into this huge, Mad Max world of, stacks of car wrecks and oil between your toes, and the amazing sounds of hammering iron. So that was like, it's overwhelming. And at the same time, outsiders don't go in there. That's like, you get lost. Literally, you get lost and you never get out if you're in this labyrinth, if you don't have a guide. So from there we thought, okay, if we want to enter this labyrinth, we have to find guidance. We need something to guide us. And that's how the idea popped up. Well, why don't we just order a car? You can go to Ford to order a car. Why don't we order a car here? That's how the process started.
Well, wow. Now, what I'm going to do is switch the focus to criminal justice, if I may, and say, Joost, so that project focused, I guess, on the informal economy meeting the formal economy. And what I'd like to ask is, why then switch to the prison, and what drew you to Nigeria and this idea of engaging with informal justice?
Yeah. Well, on the practical level, the reason we ended up in Nigeria was we had a long-standing interest in Nigeria, just as a fascinating country. I remember discussing a BBC series about Lagos, which dealt specifically with the informal systems. So we were very interested in Nigeria, and when we made a book about the Turtle Project, the car project, and we were subsequently invited by the director of Lagos Art Institution, African Artist Foundation, and he invited us to come over to Lagos to see whether we could do some kind of project similar to the one we did in Ghana. And so we went there researching, and if you're interested in informality, there's plenty of it in Lagos, right? I mean, but there's informality just in the streets, in all kinds of, let's say, transportation system, economic systems. But there's also a lot of informality within the formal systems, right? I mean, one of the reasons there is informality is that the formal systems don't work as well as people should expect them to work. So one of the interests I had was in prison systems, and I work myself in the criminal justice system, but I was always fascinated by this secretive world behind the walls, and I knew a little bit about it, about, for example, the self-organization of prisoners. And one of the examples, and later we did more research into that, we came across, and we also tracked the researcher who documented this, was about a prison in Cameroon, also a neighboring country of Nigeria, where also a large share of people who are in prisons is awaiting trial. So they are awaiting trial for a very long time. In the prison, we did the research. It's 91% of the people inside prison is awaiting trial, and this problem exists globally, also in the Netherlands, by the way. I think about 30% of inmates in the Netherlands is also awaiting trial, and so it's not a developing country issue. It's a general issue that, maybe come back to, that has to do with problems in the penal system. But so we learned about this example of this practice in Cameroon, that inmates would help themselves out, understanding why they are in prison, essentially, and how long they probably will stay in prison, and to get an understanding of their situation. And so we saw that similar problems exist in Nigeria, and want to understand the prison system from within. And we quickly learned that the same issues are present in Nigeria. So we were really interested in getting to understand the problem better. And we essentially headed out to one of the biggest prison, Kirikiri. And, through strange sort of developments, we sat across the director, who later became a friend of us and a big supporter of the project. And he said, well, in the prison system, one of the biggest problems we face is that 90% of the inmates shouldn't really be there. At least, some of them probably should be, maybe violent criminals who are awaiting trial. But a large section is more or less rotting away there. And it's also in the interest of the prison system to lower that percentage, because they block everything in the system, because they don't get funding, for example, for the food, because they only get funding for the people who are convicted. And so, and all the other resources that exist in prisons, like places where they can learn a trade, or educational tools of rehabilitation efforts, they all only exist for people who are convicted. But if you enter a prison, like Ikoyi, you enter and you see 90% of the people are not convicted, and you can see it from the clothes that they wear, because all the convicts, they wear a blue overall, and all the others just wear their clothes, I guess, they were arrested in and were brought to their family with their families later. So it's just like entering a little village, and then you realize that's an informal system all in itself, right? I mean, just behind the walls of the prison. So we were fascinated by that.
Okay, two more questions. The first is, where did you find the money to do a project in another country looking at informal systems? It's hard enough to get money to research anything, but how did you pull it together?
Well,
first.
Yeah, so let's say from my artistic practice, there is, lucky enough, in the Netherlands, quite some money for innovation. That's well, it's now declining rapidly, but the Netherlands has a tradition in a very modernistic approach of we have to innovate ourselves out of the misery. So there's a lot of money always for new ideas, and that also means for the arts. So if you have sort of, you can manage to present your work as something innovative, then there's always budgets to gain to do a pilot. So from that perspective, for me, it's, well, not easy, but let's say there's always an opportunity to find a sort of initial budget to do research with an artistic result, of course, in the hope that that will somehow kickstart, a more, let's say, more long-term initiative or change. So that helped, I think, in both projects we now talk about, to do an initial startup. And then from there, we also managed to really get to more, like, say, different budgets. And in this case, it was also a Dutch funding from Hill, but they work internationally, about how can you create innovation in justice processes with technology. And so basically, how can you and then in this case, we were obviously doing something very low tech. So it also asked a bit for adjusting to that system, but it was innovative for sure because we did something else that nobody did before.
Okay, so that's the money. But the other thing is, here are two very Dutch guys going into a very African setting. How did you cross that divide?
Well, that took a while, as you can imagine. I mean, we started the Informal Justice Corridor project in 2018. We visited Lagos the first time, and we did the project in 2021. So it took us quite a while. We spent that doing research, but getting to understand entering prisons and stuff, but also your question about how you build trust. The main thing is, and we also did it in the project in Ghana, that you need a good partner. Obviously, a local partner who has interest in the project, but who also have similar goals or the goals you can align with them. So our two principal partners, one is an organization that helps indigent, poor residents of Lagos to find justice, to maneuver. So they are clearinghouse. So they connect, for example, inmates with lawyers who work pro bono. And this NGO was also connected to the Lagos state government. So, like I said, that was maybe a bit surprising, but when you think about it, not that also all kinds of criminal justice players like the prison system, but also the prosecution service, the police. I mean, there are many who also have an interest in lowering the awaiting trial portion of the prison because, it congests everything and it makes things worse. So they thought, well, if there's a project that can help educate the inmates, who can raise awareness, empower them, but also to develop strategies to get them out of the system, that can be beneficial to us as well. So that was the one. And so they helped us really with the permission to enter the prison system. And I think we tried before on our own, and they said, well, we'll send it through to Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, and you'll hear from us. So, and I think we never heard from that again, obviously. So that's not the way, we felt this is not the way, but we should do it anyway. But so that NGO helped us a lot. And when we do the other broadcasts, the director Fumi will join us, I hope. And the other one was the Lagos State University, where Professor Aziz joined us, and he is a professor of theater. And theater is an important role in the project because at the end we made a play about this whole project that he wrote. But he was also had a long experience in engaging with inmates. So as you can imagine, it's quite a rough environment. And there are many barriers, those cultural ones, but also language wise. I mean, we speak in English, but the English I speak or Malay speak is very difficult to understand for Nigerians and the other way around. But also, it's a challenging place in the sense it's hot. These inmates have a very, very poor life. I mean, it's very difficult for them, apart from being in prison for many, many years without knowing when you're going to get a trial or when you're going to get out. So the psychological environment is very pressing. They live in cell blocks that are designed or built for maybe 40 people, and they live there with 150, 200 people crammed up, so that's also the eating, everything is straining, so to get in touch with these guys, to involve them, to engage them, because we really wanted them to have an active role. The professor, he's played a very vital role in doing this. So there were legal experts, but he also this coaching element, and also, of course, teaching the inmates, how to posture yourself, how to talk, how to gain confidence, how to relax. For example, going into a courtroom, you can imagine, is quite stressful. So apart from the legal strategy, how do you enter? Do you look at the judge or should you not look at the judge? How do you address them? How do you speak? What do you say? In what manner? That is, I think, in the Nigerian court system, which is more like the American system. And so everything has to be done in front of a judge. For example, in the Netherlands, we have a different system. We also have witnesses, of course, but they're all interviewed by the police. It's written down, and the judge is presented with a written down statement. But in Nigeria, you all have to do it in front of the judge. So there's a lot of tension. There's also the theater element, right, of a court. That is important. So he all brought that to the table. And when we had these two partners, we could really get started.
But I think, because I think the question you asked was more about how do you gain trust from a good team before the project. So I think for the almost 3 years we did research, we really invested a lot of time in finding out who is actually involved in running a prison. And we found out that the existence of a prison and to have the possibility to lock up so many people, that was only partly paid by the government. And then because they get money for 800 beds, while there are almost 4,000 people inside the prison. So the rest of them, they have to be fed. And so there we found out that churches and mosques are very important, and NGOs, but also rappers who want to make a clip and be cool were sponsoring. So we at one time end up in a football game, a football match where in prison all the blocks have to play football against each other, and then there's a final match, and then they invite sponsors and people from outside to be part of it. So there are all these sort of informal ways to gain money, to gain medicine, to gain food. Families have to basically bring literally food to the prison every day if you want to feed your son or your brother. And so there's this amazing informal network around it, and there we also spend a lot of time into figuring out how does this work, and to get these people together. Joost already mentioned it. We thought we have to find a way to also connect these different networks to each other, because we also found out nobody's talking to each other literally. It's in a secretive way they are, but there's never sort of meeting point where everybody's in the same room. And that's where we thought, if we want to organize something like this, like create an informal justice court, then we have to gain the trust of everybody, because otherwise it's a very easy thing to make it work. Everybody has to sort of be part of the idea. And that's how we set up these informal justice court rooms. So we set up a room as an exhibition in this art center, where we invited all these people, so from lawyers to church people to artistic people, photographers, theater makers, to come together to see the exhibition, but also to have a talk about, okay, what do you see? We present data in a visual way about the informal justice system, but that's how we interpreted it. And then, people started to react. And by reacting, they also found themselves in the same room, like, hey, but you're saying things that are just not true, or, you have a strange perception. And then it were very elaborative, very tense talks, but it also created a sort of first step in building a trust that actually there are no bad people in this system. It's just a matter of play your part into this sort of, forces all around you. You try to survive in it. You try to do the best you can. But everybody's doing that. And that became very clear by putting all these people together. And it was, we didn't realize that, but it was, for example, for artists, a huge step to step into a room where basically people in military uniform are there too, and you just, that's like the last thing you want as an artistic person, that it's dangerous to be around people in uniforms. But because we created an exhibition and asked people their opinion, it became a very, inspiring encounters. And from there, we could actually go into more depth. So in 3 years, we did 2 of these rooms, so 2 exhibitions. And after that, we did one sort of big workshop where we basically get all these inspired people who were all expert from their own field into the room. And then we designed the Informal Justice Court as a project. So that also really everybody was not only tapping in 1 or 2 ideas. No, they really got involved into, how we can make this work, and what needs to be part of the project to make it work. And that really made it into an integrated, smart idea where we sort of, try to balance out all the important issues in order to make it happen.
That's a very clear introduction. Now we understand the picture fully, how it started and how did you bring people together. So you talked a lot about informal system and organizations and persons working to help residents in the prison in informal ways. Did you have resistance from the formal system? Because as prison scholars, whether it's in China or the UK, I think there's a lot of resistance to, or caution, let's say, risk averseness from the formal structure to research access, to collaboration, to doing anything new. On the one hand, it might expose weakness of the system that they don't really want to be broadcasted. And second, the doing itself might invite new risk. Like one of my, a friend of mine did some art therapy in prison, and she's had officers telling her off for making the prisoners happy, because from his perspective, they should not be smiling after a workshop. They should be crying. So the fact that she made them smile really pissed him off. Or another example, like someone, the prison built a ventilation room with like boxing equipment, because the psychology expert said that's good for the mental health. But turns out one of them decided to get involved in a fight after he ventilated. He went back and he had a fight. So they were like, oh, we're going to have to close down the room again. So did you have any of that kind of positive interactions with a formal system?
Wow, yeah, they're amazing examples you give. Well, shall I, Joost? Yeah. So I think from my perspective, what I learned is that we had to make sure it benefits everybody who is in the formal system. So, and that is something we are completely not used to. That you really have to think of, okay, which officers are. Every officer has the key to one gate, and there are a lot of gates to enter. So all the gatekeepers need to be involved, but also need to benefit and to find out what they need to benefit and in what way they can benefit. That is something we could not do as outsiders because it was too delicate. The partner, PILP, so that's the organization Joost already described, who involved also the lawyers, but they did these specific talks with the officials because they somehow have the code language to find out, okay, what do you need, to be to give us control, to give over the keys. So for us, there was a process. We were basically left out. And the moments we tried to, speed it up, we most of the time did more damage than that we gained something. To give an example, it sometimes it just, we thought that there's nothing happening, people don't move and what's going on. So then we decided we just go to the prison ourselves, talk to the director and ask him, where are we? Did you read the letter? Or, can we do something? But by doing that, we thought, well, we did a good productive thing. We went to the prison, we were proactive. That just gave him some leverage in order to gain more out of, his percentage of the deal, because these two whites came suddenly in his room, they talked, and then basically we laid out all our cards, and that gave him, the benefit of, okay, now I have more leverage to get more gain out of my position. So then, we really had to sort of learn the hard way, like this is not helping, you cannot do this. This is a very delicate work to network and to figure out how can we gain trust, but also how can we leave everybody in their value? How can we keep the deals safe? Because, even among the officials, everybody has their own deals, and you cannot sort of, that's not transparent. You have to sort of keep that as a something that stays within the room. And then to puzzle all that together as a big chess game, that's something, for us that was impossible to understand, because you cannot feel where the delicacy or where the dangers are, because we are just not part of the society. So
I think we're intrigued to find out that once you got permission, how you set up the informal courts, and did you use professional actors, for example? So could you talk us through actually what you did once you got in?
Yeah, I think we so it stretched over a longer time period, and then so we were doing the research, getting the permission, and then also COVID came along, and the SARS. So COVID was a big thing because obviously you could not enter prison, so there was a whole delay on that end, and at the time there was also extreme rioting going on in Lagos because of very brutal police unit, SARS, who we later in our project came to learn a little bit more, because a lot of the inmates also were beaten and brutalized by that special police force. But there were big riots, and the riots also broke out in the prison. So also in the prison that we were in, so the inmates set the prison on fire, part of it. So there was a lot of things going on that was delayed, but the program we developed ourselves consisted of several stages, and the first one is to get to select the inmates that wanted to participate in the in the project, and we had so that local NGO that helped us out, and we interviewed, or our partners in Nigeria interviewed inmates. So they made a first selection because we wanted to have a broad selection of inmates, because the idea was we can learn from their cases. So we would maybe explain that also, maybe the core idea that it was essentially a training program for awaiting trial inmates, and they would learn about their own legal process by doing mock trials in like moot courts. They also do at university, but then the inmates themselves would take on the roles of the judge, the prosecutor, the defense lawyer, and they would be assisted by lawyers. But so first we wanted to have a good group of motivated people who there was a variance in the kinds of offenses they were arrested for. So we had case of a murder suspect, and because they were never convicted, of course, so there were murder suspects, a rape suspect, money laundering suspects, stealing, kidnapping. So a wide range of cases we wanted to have in the informal court. So the selection of inmates was one, and then of course we had to train the inmates about what they were about to do, taking up these roles. And so we also designed like a small training program for them. We invited a real judge, a real prosecutor, and they would come in and talk about from their perspective how they look at the trials and everything. But we also learned them about the Nigerian prison system. And then interestingly, and for me at least, was that a lot of the inmates got the idea directly because they already have informal courts. It's maybe another topic inside the prison. So they have, like, as a form of self-organization, they have a prosecutor, they have a judge, they have a defense, they have police. That's how they self-organize within the cells. So the idea to have an informal kind of justice was not foreign to them at all. That idea that, we can also engage in justice was not foreign to them.
Let me understand that then, Joost. To sort out problems in these, 150, 200 people in a cell, if they had a problem in the cell, they had a mini court to sort it.
Yes. So if you would break a rule, the different kind of rules, small rules, so you should help out in cleaning, because there's so many people, there are a lot of rules, and they also have a law book. It's written on the walls. All the laws you have to adhere to if you're in the cell. If you break the law, you can be prosecuted. You can defend yourself, giving an explain, and there will be a sentence. So taking up roles like that in itself was something that they knew. And the other thing was important that they, for example, let's say on average in our group, people have been awaiting a trial for maybe 6 or 7 years. So some of them 14 years, that was the top, other maybe 2 or 3 years. But that also meant, it doesn't mean that they never been to court, right? I mean, part of the problem is that they go to court, but then the court case is adjourned. But they are transported in the morning with the other inmates, and they have to sit in court all day, listening to the other cases. So that they're quite familiar, although they don't really understand everything of it, but they're quite familiar with the proceedings in a court, the understanding the role of the judge. So we could tap on that, and we practiced that with a fictional crime case. And then in the third stage, we entered with Mel and me, but more importantly the lawyers, the coaches. You asked before, didn't answer yet, about the professional actors. Yes, we did. They were part of the theater team, and so we would enter maybe in a group of like 15 people. Also students, law students were there, and then we would set up the court, which at the end was just a tent in the open air field where they play football, where we were before, looking at the football game. And that's where the people came from, the cell blocks. They would come there, and we would do the cases. And we would, we wouldn't do the whole case. That could be lengthy, and we want to do like an essential part of somebody's case. Say, for example, the role of witnesses, or more like a legal issue, self-defense, When can you reason that you acted out of self-defense? We would look at cases, or the lawyers would, what is the important thing we can learn? What is essential in his case that we practice? And then, in the beginning, they would, the inmates had to learn the roles of what to do. They were helped by the lawyers. Okay, this is important to ask this question now because this witness may be lying in your case, or he's been misinformed. So you should cross-examine him, or your lawyer should. And so we would learn that at the end of the 2.5-week period we were there, they would run their own cases. They could more or less do it on their own, but of course you would want a lawyer to be present to help them out.
Okay. Now, Joost, that's your prosecution perception of what's going on. Melle, what's happening from an artistic point of view in this tent?
Well, to also come back to your initial question about the role of the artistic of the theater makers, I think the big success of the program was that their role, and that's something we did not foresee when we started, their role was really to gain trust. I think that was the most important thing they realized, that they brought in actors. Some of them were even, known from TV, so that helped because they suddenly saw somebody famous. And they would start today with, doing a joke about, a fart in the wrong place, or just a simple joke, what everybody sort of related to, like, and then they could enjoy the moment. And then they would start the day, and they used all these simple theater training things, like how do you gain trust in a group? How do you build trust in a group? And that's something, it always works the same. And they use those techniques before we even got to the point to do a court case. They really started to, okay, there's one guy who have a big mouth, he was in the back and, frustrating the process. Well, step up, come on in front and tell us who are you, and what's your story. And by doing this sort of things on the fly, they could really also get to know the group better, and also the hierarchy between the people, who is important here, to who is everybody listening, to really get these people also somehow in charge of the process by giving them the stage. There were a lot of good musicians also in this group. Give them the stage to play a song, just break the day for a moment, play a song, and everybody knows the song, and then we continue. So with this, and it was all happening on the fly, they could really merge these people into a group who actually felt on the end as a group. And the interesting thing that happened is that in the beginning, the cases we did in the beginning, they were all lying, and they were not good. The process was also not good. They were sort of trying to lie their way out. And then, the story would fall apart. It became frustrating. People were getting restless. And then if you compare that to the last cases, let's say we did 18 cases. So one of the last cases, then, it became a hilarious, even warm moment, that before they started their case, we let them tell the story, tell the story in your own words, what happened. And then on the end of that, you could choose, are you going to lie? Is the lie going to go into court, or are you going to tell the truth? And that became very clear. Let me do the lie. Okay, we will train your lie. And you will become good in lying your way out if you think that's the way to go. And I think that was really something. Without the theater makers, we would never get to that level. That you create even the possibility for giving so much trust that you could choose, okay, let me do the lie, and then I feel more comfortable in get my chances to get out of jail. So for me, that was created the most astonishing and most beautiful moments in the whole process. And then one last thing, I think also because it's a male prison, so you have the dynamic of, who is in charge here. And let's say it's, as Joost already mentioned, they have this system inside the cell blocks, and that is something you have to relate to. So if one of the big men says no, then it's no, because once we leave, people are left over there on the system. So we have to take that system serious. And I think the theater makers got to that very quickly. Like, hey, there's a system behind the system, and we have to, take that seriously. So give them the opportunity to be boss. So, for example, one of the big men became the judge. He was always the judge because that's his real role in prison, and we give them the stage to be the judge in the play as well. So that really, I think, merged the ambition we had of getting people so far that they actually are training their case with the reality they are dealing with every day, and I think that made it work.
Okay, any last questions from you, Xiaoye?
Yeah, because of the time, there are numerous questions left that I think I will summarize them in terms of impact in the room or in the tent. Throughout the 18 cases, you have already mentioned the gradual change in trust level, in the disclosure, in the way you work together. But is there anything else that you've observed that they've taken away from your project, and also your impact afterwards, maybe from your partnership, from the NGO, from politicians, lawyers, and also maybe from whoever's, I don't know if you're exhibited the project in the Netherlands. Is there any feedback from audience in the Netherlands as well? So a bit about that, please.
Yeah, I think we had, the overall aims of the project were several ones. One was to raise awareness about the pretrial detention problem in Nigeria, but also worldwide. So that was also part of the idea to make a play about it. The play was exhibited inside the prison, but also in an art venue in Lagos, but also in front of the Minister of Justice, the Attorney General of Lagos State, which is overseeing the criminal justice process for 21 million people. So, we did the play. We had a panel discussion with human rights lawyers, with the Minister of Justice, discussing the problems and possible solutions. So that was the creating awareness. The other, obviously, goal was to help the inmates. So the building of trust was very important to develop legal strategies they could adopt in their cases. But they also, I looked it up in the morning, there were 20, 30 people at that time, we lost track a little bit, who actually released from prison in several ways. For example, it could be that they were able to get bail. Bail is a really major obstacle for people to not end up in prison further. But if you can get out. So quite a few got out. Some of them got reduced sentences. So I think they were really helped in that sense. And then the third aim that we had was to see whether this way of doing the informal justice court could be like a model, in the sense that could be repeated in other prisons, because it's a big problem. So we wrote an instructional manual, and we did like a scalability assessment. And now, the friend we're talking about, former director of one of the major prisons in Nigeria, is also exploring to see if we can do it, continue the project. The project was done in Ikoyi prison, but also in female prison in Lagos, and then repeated again. And we're now exploring if we can do it at another prison, because actually it's not that difficult to do it. I mean, you need inmates, there are plenty of them, who need legal counsel, because almost nobody has a lawyer. They want to get out. Lawyers can be engaged to do this. And you don't need much. You need a party tent, essentially. You can run it.
Yeah. And at the same time, we found out to continue a project like this, it also showed that it financially, that it's in nobody's interest to help these people, except the people themselves. So we also found out that to really maintain it, because we script it out. There's a script. So you can just start tomorrow. But the reality is that we could find no party who was actually willing to set up a financial structure to do it. And the same goes a bit for bringing it back to Europe, because then you have this sort of, also you have to jump from one reality, one continent to another. And that also makes it very difficult to translate that in a genuine way that it also sort of relates to our local circumstances. So for you just asked, did you find a way to exhibit it? Well, no, we didn't. Because all the venues we approach, I said, that's Africa. Then we should talk about you. Why are you there as a white colonial person? And you have to sort of defend yourself in this. So then you get into a different discussion, which is very important here now. But that's not about the content of the project. And so.
We'll definitely talk about that next time.
Mm-hmm.
But your point about having a pilot is good for learning lessons, and how you can take those lessons and cross cultures is certainly something we will come back to. I want to give you both a last word, if that's okay, about how arts can contribute to justice. Should we start by asking you, Joost, how can the arts contribute to justice?
Well, maybe when we talk about this project, I don't know if it's strictly art, but for me, always one of the big ways, at least how I experienced the impact, was that was the more psychological effect of the inmates being there together and sharing their story and building trusts towards the lawyers. But in a prison system, there's a lot of distrust. Obviously, they're locked up. So being there and to overcoming that and doing that, and obviously it had to do also with the fact that they were helped in their case, right? I mean, they were given assistance, but it went beyond that, because a lot of people who were in the audience, we didn't do their case at that point, but by sharing something in common, although it may sound minor compared to the other problems, I think is very important. And I think it's very difficult to achieve that without arts. The whole setup of this, it was essential, the role of arts in achieving this.
Mm-hmm. And Melle?
Yeah, I think that the main thing that art can do is challenge the status quo without being a threat. So for all the parties involved, it's hard to step out and do something innovative without challenging the status quo, and that makes you very vulnerable. So I think the arts give this opportunity for parties to do it, but without being vulnerable. So I think that's one key role. And the second thing I think is very important, that arts can bring you to the essence of why justice at all. What is justice, and what kind of justice you need in the context in order to solve things. And I think that really goes away from all the expertise and all the rules and all the history of the books are written full of it. It just goes to the essence and tries to sort of, go from there. And I think that's also one of the the power of art that can do that without, taking account of everything that is already thought of. So I think that's a sort of liberty you can take.
You've both captured exactly why Xiaoye and I want to do this podcast. Thank you very, very much. A big thank you to you. And we're already looking forward to talking again with Nigerian colleagues, because it would be great to have them around the table. So we're going to set that up, and we will send out that podcast when it's available. And also in this series, we're planning to reach out to China, Australia, and a true crime writer in future podcasts. So please do keep an eye open for those upcoming events. So thanks to everyone for watching or listening to this podcast on YouTube. If you've enjoyed this session of Just Arts, do encourage your colleagues to listen and to join the conversation by visiting INCJ's website at criminaljusticenetwork.net, or go to Spotify or your preferred podcast provider and find other topics of interest to you. So it's cheerio from the four of us. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, and keep well, and we'll see you next time. Cheerio. You have been listening to the INCJ podcast, conversations about international criminal justice. To find out more, go to our website at criminaljusticenetwork.net, or follow us on Twitter at INTCJ Network.